To order the September 19th, 2019 meeting of the Zoning Hearing Board. First matter of business, I'd like to invite everyone to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. The first matter on the agenda this evening is Appeal 3028, the applicant Daniel Brogan, property located at 19 Rodney Road, requests an extension of time for obtaining a permit under Section 280-144 of the Zoning Code for an additional 6 months to February 4th, 2020. I'd like to point out that Mr. Martin will be recusing himself from this matter, so
Thank you.
He will step away. He will rejoin us in a short while. He better. Mr. Brogan?
Good evening. Obviously, you guys approved my initial variance last February in writing, and the plans took me a little longer to get together and were more expensive when I got the estimates from the contractors than I anticipated, so I just need more time to work with the contractors or find an alternative bid and financing for the project.
Okay, and in terms of your expected timing to get all that in motion, what do you think you're going to need?
I think the 6 months would be sufficient to the extent that I'm able to get it to a place where I can proceed with the project. If not, then not.
Okay. Mr. Simon will be participating in this matter. Are there any questions from the board? I'll entertain a motion at this point.
Motion to approve.
Second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? You have your extension. Good luck.
Thank you.
And hopefully we
we'll
won't see you again, but
Have a
we're
good
here.
night.
Thanks. As Mr. Martin re-enters the room after his tour of sports memorabilia, we turn to Appeal 3045. The applicant, DJB Properties, 131 and 133 Garrett Avenue, appealing the zoning officer's enforcement notice dated June 6, 2019, regarding a structure that exceeds the maximum allowable building height. I will not read the remainder of the notice into the record, as it's already in the record, as we are continuing a proceeding that was commenced at our August 29, 2019 meeting. I want to point out a couple of matters before the board returns to its deliberations. First, yesterday afternoon we received a submission from the Township, and this morning a response from Applicants Council regarding matters that they wished this board to consider in conjunction with the matter. I am going to find that the submission from the Township will not be regarded inasmuch as we concluded the hearing, the submission of evidence and arguments from the parties at the August 29th meeting. As such, any additional after-the-fact submission that the Township might care to make is non-timely and will not be considered by the board at this time. Unfortunately, the Applicants Council had to respond to that, as is understandable, and I'm sorry that that's the case. But we're going to disregard the Township's submission and the responses at this point. Let's see. So now what we will do is resume the deliberations on the motion that was before the board when we continued the August 29th meeting. And to refresh the board's recollection, well, let me do one other thing. The members of the board who will be participating in the deliberations are those 5 members of the board that attended the August 29th meeting. That will be Mr. Martin, Mr. Nagel, Mr. Weitzman, Ms. Foreman, and myself. So going back to the motion that's before the board, the motion was from Mr. Nagel to the effect that that the zoning hearing board accept the applicant's request to overturn the enforcement notice based on a theory of variance by estoppel. In returning to the deliberations, I think it is, unless the board has other thoughts, I think it's probably efficient at this point for each participating member of the board to share any final thoughts they have on the deliberations and the motion, and then we can turn to a vote, unless there are other avenues of approach that the board might want to take. Okay, seeing none, who would like to start?
I'll start. Since the meeting at the end of August, I've given the matter additional consideration, looked at the materials that we were given, the briefs of counsel, and my notes from the testimony. And my conclusion has not changed. I'm in opposition to the motion. The reason I'm in opposition to the motion is that as we're assessing this based upon the 5-prong test of Petrovsky, one of the prongs of the test is the applicant's good faith throughout the proceeding. I do not believe that the record demonstrates that there was that good faith throughout the proceeding. One thing in particular that upon review I noted is the following. In looking at the materials that were provided to us by counsel, and counsel on both sides did a very effective job of representing their client's interest. Discussion was made of the submission of Luce Architects, the 2018 land development set, which was an exhibit to the developer's brief, and was also shared with us in full-size set at the meeting back in August. And the brief makes the point that several of the sheets prepared by Luce show clearly and unambiguously that the proposed structures were to be built to a height of 35 feet. So that's consistent with their argument that while they may have made a mistake, the township should have caught it, and it was clear from the plans. In reviewing the plans a little bit more closely, and if anybody happens to have brought theirs, I'll call it to your attention. Where I'm looking is A5 of the sheets. And A5 has 3 diagrams. A diagram of the building from one perspective, the left side elevation, the rear elevation, the front elevation. And what I noted is that on the front elevation, on the left margin, is a line that says building height with a note of 29 feet, 5.5 inches. The line goes up to the sort of the peak of the 2 main structures, does not purport to measure either to the midpoint of the high slope roof or to the top of the building, or the top of the attic at the top of the building. And what I'm perplexed by is that these materials were submitted back in August of 2018. The testimony is that up until February or perhaps March or perhaps April of 2019, the developer was always under the impression that they were operating on a 35-foot limit. So I'm perplexed why submission would be made to the township that would use the phrase building height, which is a defined term under the code, use a number of 29 feet, 5.5 inches, at a point when testimony is they thought they could go to 35 feet, and they thought that the relevant point of measurement was the midpoint of the highest slope roof. So it's inconsistent with the testimony, and it is not suggestive of a continuous pattern of good faith. The other points regarding good faith were the points I mentioned in my comments previously, that the applicant was advised by neighbors and based on the township's testimony, were advised by Mr. Kachansky in February of 2019 that there was an issue with the proposed height of the building, and construction continued. And then there are emails in April, specifically an April 23 email from Mr. Kachansky stating, "You're building too high, stop until we figure this out." Now, that was not a formal notice. I certainly understand that. But development continued. And then when there was some confusion that I think I probably contributed to earlier, when the enforcement notice was delivered, and obviously the enforcement notice was appealed, but it's issued June 6, 2019, and it says, quote, "You're advised to cease all construction activities until this matter is resolved." And clearly, the construction proceeded beyond June 9th, essentially until completion of the project. So the applicant comes to us now and says, "You can't deny me this variance because I've completed the building." Well, one of the reasons they completed the building was they proceeded notwithstanding the caution lights that were being issued back in the middle of the winter. So my analysis is that given the totality of the circumstances, there was not good faith, and I'm going to be voting against the motion.
I'll be brief. I feel that's well said, and I actually am going to be voting against the motion as well tonight. For much the same reasons, I have a difficult time with the good faith prong of the analysis, and most certainly, as you just said, the caution lights were flashing, and yet construction proceeded almost uninhibited, and that's why I'll be voting against it tonight.
I've also been, thinking about this, and I agree that 29-foot mark on that plan, we never got an answer on that, why that showed up the way it does. So that is confusing. We're talking a lot about good faith here, and in my opinion, after February, the property owner did act in good faith, but I think we're not focusing on the facts here because, to be very simplistic about this, October 2018, the township tells the property owner he can build it in accordance with the plans. 4 months later, February 2019, they call up the property owner and tell him there's a problem, effectively that he has to meet the actual requirement. Which, based on the testimony, meant he would have to tear the building down. I think what we're forgetting is, in February, the building was already built. The damage was already done. We have pictures that was put into evidence. The roof was on, the structural components of the roof were complete, the sheathing was complete, and based on the documents presented, they had already spent $400,000 as of February, the first time the township got in contact with them. So from October to February, certainly I think the property owner acted in good faith. I don't think it matters what he did after that because the damage was already done in February. It wasn't done later in June or August. Again, the damage had already been done. So that's why I can't get past this, that somehow he'd be required to tear that building down, and how in what world that is a fair result. I just can't get there. So.
Hi. I plan to vote against the motion simply because I believe the enforcement notice is lawful. The building does not meet code, and the builder knew it did not meet code, and when the enforcement notice was given out, it was in a lawful manner because we have strict code and the building does not meet code. There's been a tremendous amount of work done in that neighborhood, in the community, to keep the community within certain regulations, and this does not meet code. So I would vote to uphold the enforcement notice.
This is an unfortunate set of circumstances, obviously. I don't know that there's anyone, though, arguing that the structure as constructed does satisfy the code. That's not the issue, as I view what is in front of us. The issue is whether a variance by estoppel has been granted by reason of the circumstances surrounding the issuance of the original permit and the satisfaction of the other tests that are set forth in Petrosky. That's the governing law with respect to the matter that is before us. We obviously, everyone that is aware of the prior, excuse me, the August meeting, we had a lot of evidence entered into the record. It's clear that there were mistakes made on all sides. It's also clear to me, though, that the warning lights be what they may. The township did not issue a stop order until June of 2019. How it is that they took between February and June to issue the enforcement notice is beyond me. If they thought it was inappropriate, that February timeframe seems to me would have been when the enforcement notice should have gone out. But that's obviously all Monday morning quarterbacking, because we're looking at the circumstances in their totality as they've occurred. But I think it goes too far to suggest that in the absence of a stop work order, the builder was acting in bad faith by continuing to build a property, presumably in accordance with approved plans. I don't see that as bad faith. Were there issues identified in February? Yes, there were. Was it adjudicated in February? Was it determined in February that there was a violation? No. The enforcement notice is just that, an enforcement notice. Obviously, the building does not comply with the specific provisions in that section of the Garrett Hill zoning district. But the question is, what is the equitable resolution of this matter on the basis of all the facts and all of the occurrences that have taken place since the issuance of the permit through the issuance of the stop work order? And I think the applicant has made its case that a variance by estoppel has been established. And as a result of that, I will obviously be voting in favor of the motion. Is there any other discussion on the motion? I will call a vote. All in favor of granting the motion made by Mr. Nagel, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
Okay. All right, we'll raise hands. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Riley and Nagel. All opposed? Martin, Weitzman, and Foreman. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to confirm the issuance of the enforcement notice dated June 6, 2019, related to 131 Garrett Avenue. No need to confirm.
No, there's no, it's, unless we say it's bad, it's good. So that concludes this matter. Let's move on to the next item in the agenda. Appeal 3047. The applicant, David Hoffman, property located at 767 and 769 Newtown Road and zoned AC Agricultural Conservation. The applicant requests a special exception under Section 280-101A2 to build an addition to the rear of the existing non-conforming two-family dwelling located on the property. Applicant also requests variances from Section 280-92A1, calling for a 75-foot setback from the street right-of-way line, and Section 280-97B4, regarding accessory buildings in the front yard, to allow for the replacement of two accessory garages located in the Newtown Road front yard setback with two new accessory garages that will be located no closer to the road than the existing two-family dwelling or the two existing garages. In addition, to the extent required, applicant requests a variance from Section 280-109A to allow a wall in excess of 6 feet in height to be attached to the rear of the two-family dwelling, which wall will be located between the outdoor terrace for each dwelling unit. We have to shorten these notices. Mr. Brosman.
Good evening. My name is George Brosman. I represent David Hoffman, who's seated here in the front row. He's the owner of the property at 767, 769 Newtown Road. I'm going to have two witnesses this evening, David Fiorello, the engineer, and Amy Stein, who's an architect, who's here, and David Hoffman is available if we need him. This property, just by way of introduction, you will probably recognize this beautiful old building. It's part of the original Ardrossan estate. There's a photo of it there. It's a two-family dwelling, and it has two detached garages, associated driveways. It's one of the old buildings that was part of the Ardrossan estate. It's behind the majestic wall that goes down Newtown Road, and the old building is right up along the road there. This old building was part of the Ardrossan subdivision, which was approved by density modification, approved by conditional use by the Radnor Board of Commissioners in 2014. Mr. Hoffman grew up in Radnor Township, right near the building here, and he's become a steward of several historic buildings in the area in Radnor as well as Lower Marion Township. And there might even be others that I don't know about. He's enjoys updating old buildings like this and adapting them to today's living standards to help preserve them, and that's why he purchased the property last year. As you can see, the building's a beautiful old building. It's right up on the road. It is in need of modernization and updating. It's certainly worthy of continued preservation. You'll hear testimony about the two garages that flank the building. They're unattractive. They don't really relate well to the building. And you'll hear testimony that Mr. Hoffman proposes to demolish those and rebuild them with nicer looking garages, and we'll go through that. The legal issues here are sort of interesting because the building is a two-family dwelling. It's a non-conforming use in the AC district where the Ardrossan estate is. Under the Radnor Code, you're allowed to expand a non-conforming use under Code Section 280-101A2 by special exception. So we're seeking a special exception to add an addition to the rear of the building to improve the living space. The building and the garages are also dimensionally non-conforming to the applicable setbacks from Newtown Road. And there's also a provision that says accessory structures like garages aren't normally allowed in the front yard setback. These garages and this house are all in the setback. We're seeking approval to eliminate the unattractive old garages and replace them with two that will also be in the front yard, but will be no closer to the setback than the existing buildings to maintain the historic development pattern here and the look of the lot. So we will not be increasing the degree of the nonconformity. The additions, you'll hear testimony, the addition in the back will comply with all the other applicable requirements of the ordinance. With that, I would like to have David Fiorello sworn in and testify.
I do. David Fiorello, it's F as in Frank, I-O-R-E-L-L-O. I'm a registered civil engineer in the state of Pennsylvania.
And I've handed up to the board, while the notice was being read, exhibit packs. I left at everybody's station, and we have some here. David, for the record, at A1 was just a copy of the application we filed. At A2, is this a copy of a summary of your professional qualifications?
Yes, it is.
And you're a licensed engineer in Pennsylvania?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Engineering from Villanova University, and I've been practicing civil engineering for 40-plus years.
I would offer David as an expert in civil engineering.
Without objection.
Thank you. David, are you the civil engineer that's working on this project for David Hoffman?
Yes, I am.
And were you and your firm also the civil engineering firm that did the density modification development for the Ardrossan estate?
Yes.
I'd like to just go over existing conditions for the record. At Exhibit A3, we have 4 photographs that are marked A3, A through D. A3A is here on the table. Would you briefly describe these photographs?
A3A is the front facade of the building. The photograph is taken from the center of Newtown Road, looking in the south direction into the Ardrossan estate. The wall that George mentioned along Newtown Road, which runs roughly a mile or so in front of the Ardrossan estate, is shown in the photograph.
And could you flip to photograph B?
Photograph B is the rear of this building, so we're generally standing on the back of the lot looking north at the rear of the building.
And photograph C?
Photograph C is the existing frame garage on the the west end of the property. It is looking at the front of the building. It is to the right. Right now there is an existing driveway that comes through the wall and serves the existing garage.
And those garage doors currently face out towards Newtown Road?
Yes, they do.
And photo D?
Photo D is the existing one-car garage on the east side of the property, to the east of the building. Again, through a driveway through the wall, front doors facing onto Newtown Road. I'm sorry.
And David, you heard me state, and could you confirm that were these buildings once part of the Ardrossan estate?
Yes, they were.
And how did it come to be on its own lot?
As part of the Ardrossan subdivision, we went through a density modification conditional use hearing where a number of the existing dwellings on the Ardrossan estate were subdivided into their own lots as part of the overall subdivision. This was one of them.
And the zoning district is still the AC district?
The underlying zoning district is the AC zoning district, correct.
And is it correct what I said in the beginning, as a two-family dwelling, a non-conforming use in the AC district?
That is correct.
If you could turn to A4, these are just a couple of the sheets from the final land development plans for the Ardrossan estate. Is that correct?
Yes, these were prepared from our office. These were part of the final subdivision approved in 2014 by the board.
And the purpose of this is just to show that there was a note on sheet 10, which is the second sheet there, that did confirm that the township was recognizing this as a two-family dwelling. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it's hard to see here, but that would be found at note 3 of sheet 10. David, because the property was approved as a density modification development, does the zoning code in 28010.a indicate that the density modification provisions would apply to this lot as well?
Is my understanding of the wood, yes.
And could you turn to Exhibit A5, and you might have a larger
I do have a
copies?
larger copy.
Are these the plans that we submitted with this application?
Yes, this is a plan showing this lot, which was lot 2-5 of the original subdivision. It was part of the Phase 2 portion. It shows the lot was reconfigured. It shows the frontage along Newtown Road, and it shows the existing dwelling almost in the center, and the two garages that were mentioned, one flanking the building.
And for the record, this is sheet 1 of 2 of the plan we filed with the
Yes,
application?
it is.
And this plan, we won't go into the details unless the board would like. This does show the the setbacks and things like that, and
It
that the
shows the
buildings are
set-
non-conforming to the
Yes, it
front
shows the
yards?
setback as part of the original subdivision for Newtown Road. The right-of-way of Newtown Road, which was originally 33 feet, was increased to 60 feet, which makes the buildings that much more non-conforming to the right-of-way. But they've always been, or they've been there for a long period of time. They are non-conforming to the current.
Do you mind showing the
Regulations.
setback lines to people?
The right-of-way line,
Do you wanna
The
use-
buildable area on the lot.
the
I guess is-
buildable area on the lot, the setback line, the front yard setback is this line that I'm pointing to here that runs east to west, and it is measured 75 feet off the edge of the right-of-way.
And then you get the rear.
There is a perimeter setback as required by the overall subdivision, and that was a 75 perimeter setback. The rear yard is shown as 35 feet off the back.
Then that narrow strip between those two is the buildable area?
Correct.
Why can't you put the structure there? Sounds look very long, narrow. New England.
So if we flip to sheet 2 of Exhibit A5, is this the, you took Amy's plan and put it on a civil engineered site plan, is that correct?
Yes, what we did is we've highlighted the areas of the proposed work. The proposed addition is shown at the rear of the building. It is shaded a dark gray or a brownish gray. Behind that is proposed open terraces. The proposed garages are shown flanking the buildings. They are shown with a side entry garage doors, so the driveways are still consistent with the existing locations. However, they do flare in to allow turning movements into a side-load garage.
On that point, is it generally true that the way the existing garages are with the front-loaded doors and a relatively short driveway, there has to be some backing out into Newtown Road?
Pretty much so, yes.
And this would
This would
cure
eliminate it.
that?
It provides turnaround space for a vehicle backing out of the garage and be able to pull forward out onto Newtown Road.
And just for the record, to go through the requirements for the special exception, 280-101A2, there's a number of items there. I'm just going to ask you some questions about those. In your professional opinion, will the proposed addition be materially detrimental to the character of the surrounding area or the interests of the township?
I do not think so, no.
And the ordinance provides that the area devoted to the nonconforming use will not be increased by more than 50%. Do you have notes on the plan to confirm that requirement is satisfied?
Yes, we do.
Admittedly, the plan is a little small, so maybe you could walk us through compliance with each of the alterations to the nonconforming uses, please.
As well as the definition of area, since it's not
Right.
defined in the code.
Yeah, the way we did it, and David and Amy can help me, but the building itself is the nonconforming use, the two-family dwelling. So at the bottom of the page, the floor area of that two-family dwelling was used, and David could read that off.
The existing two-family floor area is 3,338 square feet. The proposed one-story addition is 1,430. So the floor area increase is 42.87%.
Now, David, there's another provision of the ordinance that says that the addition to the nonconforming use should otherwise comply with applicable area height and setback regulations. Is that met?
Yeah, the fact that the building addition is being set behind the existing dwelling, and my understanding, it's a one-story addition, so the floor area, or I'm sorry, the building height is not being increased any higher than current conditions.
And the plans, you're not seeking any variances from any height, building coverage and impervious coverage if there are such limits.
That is correct.
And we talked a little bit about in the notice about this little wall here. Can you explain what that is?
On the wall, or I'm sorry, on the plan shown as this line here, it's shaded pink, is a, back a little, lack of a better word, I guess, a party wall to separate the two stone terraces, giving some privacy to each. That wall is attached to the building, and its highest point is proposed to be 7 feet high.
And we asked for relief to the extent required. There's a provision in the ordinance about fences and walls, 109A, and it limits the height of a wall. We were of the mind that that provision, the intent of that is really to regulate the height of walls along property lines and along right-of-ways. But out of an abundance of caution, we asked for relief to make this wall a little higher than that code provision.
Okay. I had stated the wall was 7 feet. I was incorrect there. The wall is proposed to be 8 feet high.
Is there any place in the plans that specifies either the height or the length of the wall?
We have the wall shown, the length. I don't have on this plan noted the height. Amy, in the architectural drawings, it may be shown in there.
Yeah, the challenge here is going to be describing the wall with sufficient specificity for the record that everybody understands, excuse me, the relief that's being granted. So
Right.
how far does the wall extend out from the wall of the main structure? If you guys are covering that elsewhere. Okay.
Amy
Can you
has it.
cover that, Amy? Amy will cover that. We'll give you the length and the height. And I just wanted to note, I won't ask Dave these questions, but just in the nature of our argument here, whether a variance would be required, if you look at 109.A, it seems, as I said, clear that it's really meant for along the right-of-way or along property lines. Also, if you look at 280-4, the definition of fence or wall, and I know this is a technical argument, but it does say it's a structure designed to enclose a lot or a portion of a lot, or to separate a lot from an adjoining lot or a right-of-way. Technically, I don't think this wall really satisfies that, but I do think there's a good reason to give a dimensional variance for that as well. So we wanted to give you both ways to deal with that. Also, the 109A does say that a wall of a building would not be included in this height limit. I don't know if the board would agree that because the wall is attached to the building, it could be deemed a wall of the building. So there would be several ways to approach that. In any event, turning to the garages, David, you already indicated that the garages are obviously already in the front yard setback. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the way you've drawn the new garages, the nonconformity to the setback will not be increased?
Those garages are set back at the same setback as the existing dwelling, so that there will be no increase in the nonconformity.
And Radnor Code 101B1 does permit an extension of a nonconforming building by right as long as the extension does not increase the nonconformity. These buildings are not increasing the nonconformity, correct?
Correct.
However,
Well,
since
I mean,
these are new
the-
garages, we have asked for variance relief.
Yeah, let me ask a question about that. I mean, yeah, it's a garage, yeah, it's in the front yard setback, but is the garage larger than the existing garage?
Yes.
One is larger. They might,
Well, the original one was 14 feet,
Right.
and the new one's 24 feet
Right.
wide.
Yes.
So it's significantly larger.
and part of the reason Amy will testify is that we feel the garages are substandard in size, And,
Well, I get the, I
Right.
understand why you need to do it,
Right.
but I guess my question is, don't you have to put that into the calculation of 50% test?
I don't
Because
believe
they're
that,
non-conforming, and I guess this goes to your question, what area means, but they're non-conforming, they're being expanded.
well, the
So-
garages, the way we looked at it was the garages are non-conforming buildings to the setback. They're not the non-conforming use. The non-conforming use is the dwelling, the two-family dwelling, that's the thing that's not allowed.
Okay, so you're focusing on the use as opposed to
Right.
the size, okay.
Right. So for the expansion of the non-conforming use, it's whether the two-family dwelling is being expanded.
All right.
As to the dimensionally non-conforming buildings, the cases usually look at, are you going any closer to what you have? So we excluded that from the
Yeah,
calculations. I
yeah.
think
I guess
rightly
the
so.
question is, should it be included or not?
Right. I personally think it should not be part of the non-conforming use. A single dwelling can have multiple accessory buildings and more than one garage, so that wouldn't be non-conforming. It's really the dwelling being two living units that's the non-conforming use. David, in your opinion, will these garages alter the essential character of the neighborhood or be detrimental to the public welfare?
In my opinion, no.
And as you said before, there's really no practical place to put them except that little bowling alley in the back, correct?
That is correct.
That's all I have for David. I'd like Amy to be sworn in. There may be questions.
Are there
Yeah.
any other questions?
Yeah, I mean,
the board.
I mean, clearly, you know, when it comes to variance, it's the minimum relief necessary. So you have to go from 31 to 75. So giving you a relief of 40 is less than 31. So moving the garages back, and as we know, no one's entitled to a garage on a property. It's a nice to have. So again, have you looked at other spots, putting it set back so it's farther away from the roadway? Because again, it's the minimum relief necessary. I get you enlarge it to get the turnaround, but you could obviously have it further set back, so that's even less of an issue. And
Sir,
I understand the
think
aesthetic purpose of it. but
Yeah,
yes,
and
so
I think
let's
there's
not talk
room
about
on the
that.
lot to move those garages back. But again, I think the intent is to maintain the historic facade along Newtown Road where those garages have existed for quite a while. So the intent here was sort of mimic the existing conditions so it doesn't change all that much.
The other issue, and Amy was going to talk about this, is that, there are some trees you can see in these locations. I can have her talk about them. They are trying to preserve those. And of course, if they were moved back, there would just be more impervious coverage, more disturbance to the land. This is kind of keeping it the way it was, maintaining that historic setback with much more attractive buildings and reasonably sized garages. They're only two-car garages, which I think is reasonable for today's, modern living.
Is there any change to the front wall because of these new driveways being put in?
No, there's not.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Thank you.
Amy?
I do. Amy Stein, S-T-E-I-N.
Amy, could you describe your educational and professional background to the board?
Yes, I have 25 years practicing architecture. I do a wide range of projects from college and universities to public buildings, to government buildings, to residences, and many of them have been on historic buildings. So I have a specialty in that and sit on the Historical Commission Architectural Committee in Philadelphia.
And Exhibit A6 in our exhibit package, is this a very brief summary of your professional
Yes, it is.
qualifications? I'd like to offer Amy as an expert in architecture and design.
Without objection.
Thank you. Amy, are you familiar with this property?
Yes, I am.
And did your firm design the proposed improvements that are subject to the application here tonight?
Yes, we did.
And David's plans that we've been using were basically your design?
Yes, they are.
And in addition to the plans, we had some conceptual renderings. Did your office prepare these?
Yes, we did.
And these are at A7, and we're going to just call them 1, 2, and 3. Could you describe these?
The rendering that you see on the screen is a rendering from Newtown Road, looking at the historic main house. We're proposing the one-story addition in the rear, and I think this rendering is important because it shows how subtle that addition is from Newtown Road. You can see it in the back. I'll point it out here. That's the one-story addition, and we did that in particular because the main house is designed in the Cotswold style and has an incredibly beautiful roof line that we'd like to maintain as you walk around the house and property. So I think that demonstrates, this illustration demonstrates that idea.
And moving on to the second sheet of the renderings.
This second rendering that you see on the screen shows the one-story addition from the rear of the property. So this is what, you can't see this from Newtown Road, this is what a neighbor would see from Ivy Lane. So this is from the southwest corner looking northeast.
And the wall that we were talking about is shown there, correct?
So this is the wall, and we did verify, George, that it's 16 feet in length and 8.5 feet in height.
And that is the wall that we are seeking approval for.
And it is a masonry wall, rubble stone masonry wall.
And is there another rendering there, the third sheet?
On the third page, this is a rendering from Newtown Road, and it is looking at the main house that you see in the center. It shows one of the two new proposed garages that are basically set coplanar or flush to the front of the main house. They're two-car garages, and we've turned them so the entry is on the side to improve the safety of the condition that exists there today. So this allows us to get a turn to happen within the property walls so that the residents do not need to back out onto Newtown. It's pretty unsafe given the speed of the traffic.
Are the two replacement garages of the same size?
Yes, currently there's a two-car garage on the west and a one-car garage on the east. Someone had asked that earlier. We're replacing each with a two-car garage. So the one is replaced almost in kind, though it is shifted over, and the other one is about twice the size. You can see this photograph, the condition of the garages. This one has T11 siding on it, and it's missing a garage door. They're in very poor condition. And you can see the driveway in the foreground, which goes straight to Newtown Road. So it's important to us to improve that safety and also the aesthetics of the garage to make sure it's complementary to the home.
Will they have a similar stone-type facade? And that goes for the addition also on the back?
For the garages,
To match the existing house.
Right.
somehow.
For the garages, we are not, would not want to propose stone. We're proposing a wood-framed garage
All right.
because we think that's more in keeping with the home, which was probably placed there before any garages ever arrived on the site, so we think wood framing is better. The rear addition will be a combination of rubble stone along the sides
Yeah.
and the courtyard wall and wood framing and glass. So we had, there was one rendering in
And
the back.
was this building always a two family residence?
It-
Or
yes.
was it a barn or?
It was
you
a
know?
tenant, it was 4 servants basically on the property that lived there.
All right. Interesting.
So the rendering, maybe this committee doesn't look for materiality, but the stone walls are along the side and the terrace and along the courtyard wall that separates the two.
I'm an old
properties.
HARB member, so I'm interested in that stuff.
Happy to oblige.
Maybe I'm just old.
And Amy, you Do you believe that the proposed garages are more complementary to the existing building and improvement over the existing garages?
I do.
And did you have anything to add about why you think it's important to have the garages in this location as opposed to pushing them further back?
That's a good question. We struggled with the location of the garages. We wanted to make sure the stone wall along Newtown Road was preserved. It's quite lovely. You can see in the images. It's very prominent. As David said, it's a mile long. And so having the entrance points of the garages remain as is and no changes to that wall was the highest priority. There are also groves of trees on either side of the garages that are really, there's about 4 to 5 heritage trees along the sides, and we did not want to alter those or have to take them down. So we positioned the garage very carefully to allow the turning radius of the car to not disturb any of the heritage trees. If we push these garages back, in particular on the east side of the property, there's a 50-inch tree that I think we'd lose. It's very tight, is all I can say after having studied many different locations.
And do you think those are in keeping with the historical pattern here?
Yes, we are looking. We're looking to be complementary to the roof line of the original property. We want to keep the garages as low as possible because, again, that view shed and the view corridor to the main house is the top priority. So we want them to be subtle.
And
buildings.
the trees you mentioned, Amy, turning back to Dave's plan, which is A5 sheet 2, are these represented here on the plan with various markings?
The heritage trees are all along the sides here, and they really do extend down Newtown Road. So as you approach the property, there's a forested site on either side. The driveway entrances are here and here. The turn is here, and then the garage is positioned at the side. So the garage door would be along the west and the east sides of the property, sort of tucked behind the trees.
So this plan has the additional advantage of not only making it look better, curing the safety problem, but if you preserve the wall and keep the openings where it is, you've managed to not push the garage and the driveway further back into the 32-inch oak, the other 32-inch tree on the east side, and then on the west, there's another very large oak. Is that correct?
Correct.
Amy, do you have an opinion? Will this project in any way be detrimental to any neighboring property or the public health, safety, and welfare?
Not in my opinion.
And that's all I have. I do have a little bit of closing argument, some case law to bring to your attention.
Any other questions from the board for this witness? Thank you.
Just very briefly.
I'm sorry,
oh.
I forgot. Are there any members of the public who care to speak to this application? Seeing none. Seeing one. As I said, seeing one.
My client, David Hoffman, wanted to say something.
Try to raise my
Okay.
hand. I do. David Hoffman, Hoffman. I just want to thank the board for their consideration, and I think the symmetry of the garages is a big improvement. They're much better looking, and I think we're preserving the spirit of the Ardrossan estate and creating a building that will have 2 rental units with the ground floor master suites, which offer something which is not very easily accessible in the township. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else, Mr. Brosman, if you want to conclude.
Just briefly, I think we've demonstrated that we meet the special exception standards and that we did the calculation based on the non-conforming use, which is just the 2-family dwelling. With regard to the location of the garages, there's a couple cases that I can give a copy to your solicitor, but there's a case out of Radnor Township, the appeal of Crawford, all the way back from 1948, where a dimensionally non-conforming building was allowed to remain in a setback, and one of the hardships was to help preserve trees, which we've talked about. I think Mr. Nagel actually brought up the issue, but keeping the wall the way it is, I think, is another factor. Citing these driveways as we have also goes to the location of the garages. There's also a case, Borough of Ingram, which I have a copy for you if you'd like to have it, that basically said that if you have a lot with, a house that's setting the setback, a garage could come in and kind of match that. So we're not only matching the setbacks of the garages that are there today, albeit they're smaller, we are not going further than the setback long established by this house. That's the Borough of Ingram case. And there's a couple other cases I have, Treadle versus Zoning Hearing Board, and the Money case out of Haverford Township, where actually dimensionally non-conforming buildings were demolished because they were dilapidated, as these garages are, and they were allowed to be rebuilt in the location with the same setback. In at least one of the cases, Treadle, it was a shed, and it was allowed to be made bigger, but as long as it didn't go further into the setback. And there's also the Supreme Court case of Grubb and Yoakum, which stand for that proposition as well. So I have copies if anybody would like those. I can hand them out, just for the solicitor or others. I would ask that my exhibits be moved into the record, and that's all that we have.
Okay, without objection.
Thank you.
Would someone like to offer a motion on the request for the special exception?
I'll make a motion to approve special exception under Code Section 280-101A2 to build in addition to the rear property as set forth in the plans and the testimony.
Second?
Second?
Any board discussion? No discussion. I'll call the vote. All in favor of the motion to grant the special exception, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, good luck.
We only did half the
Oh,
job.
I'm sorry.
We have the wall and the garages.
That's right, I forgot the wall and the garages, sorry. Would someone like to make a motion on the request for the variance with respect to the garage and the wall?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we grant a variance from the setback requirements for the replacement of the two garages at the locations indicated on the plans, and a variance to allow for a construction of the wall to the rear of the building to be a height of approximately 8.5 feet and a length of approximately 16 feet.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. Those in favor of the motion to grant the exceptions described, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? No one opposed? Thank you. Good luck. Okay. No, thanks. The last item before us is the appeal number 3048. The applicant, Edward G. Babin, property located at 406 Woodland Avenue and zoned R2 residential. The applicant is seeking relief from Section 280-22C of the zoning code pertaining to side yard setbacks. The R2 zoning district requires a 10-foot side yard setback for accessory structures. The applicant is proposing to reconstruct a garage 6 feet 10 inches from the side property line. I'll allow Mr. Falcone to stop, to finish handing out the items.
How is
Mr.
everyone
Falcone,
tonight?
good evening.
Good
Please
evening.
proceed.
Good to see you all again. As you had just explained, we are here on behalf of Mr. Babin, who is the owner of the property, and we are seeking at 406 Woodland. We're seeking a single variance, and that's to reconstruct a garage within the side yard setback, which is 10 feet in the R2 district. We're saying reconstruct the garage because this whole process goes back quite a bit. When Mr. Babin purchased the property, he commenced pretty significant renovations to the home and then ultimately to the property. There was an existing garage located on the site. Earlier this year, Mr. Babin decided he would take that garage down and replace it. As part of that process, he submitted permits to the township and intended to keep the garage in its then current position, which would be a pre-existing non-conforming condition, again located 6 feet 10 inches from the side yard property line. After receiving the permits, the application, he commenced that demolition and ultimately went to construct the garage. When he took the garage down, one of the conditions that was explained to Mr. Babin's agent was when you take the garage down, the wall must remain, you must have the footings, the foundation there in order to maintain your pre-existing non-conforming condition. The wall came down, the garage was so old there was no foundation. So he stopped construction, contacted the township, was advised you're going to need to seek a variance. You can't continue with the construction as you were permitted. He did that, submitted the application that you have before you, and it is to reconstruct the garage as was originally intended. There's been no deviation from that side yard. The reconstructed wall would be exactly where the previous wall was, which is 6 feet 10 inches from the side property line. He'd like to construct the garage as it was permitted, but would like to obtain the necessary relief before doing so. We have pre-marked a few exhibits, which I'll quickly explain. A1 is a copy of our application. A2 is the ownership information showing that Mr. Babin is indeed the owner of the property. A3 is an aerial photograph. A4 is a series of photographs, not just of Mr. Babin's property, but of some other properties in the neighborhood that also locate their garages inside that side yard setback. It's pretty common in this neighborhood. It's a historic neighborhood, and ultimately Mr. Babin appeared before the HARB as part of this application. A5 is a site plan, the garage addition. That was what was included with the permit application to the township. A6 is a copy of that application, and A7 is some grading permit correspondence where, again, the pre-existing non-conforming condition was recognized by the township, but the idea that if the wall came down and the footings had to be moved or re-poured, Mr. Babin would have to come back to the township, and that's what he's doing now. Staff has been great in this process. They've worked with Mr. Babin, given him good advice, and really that's why we're here tonight. They advised that he come before this board. I did mention that he did appear before the HARB, and they did recommend approval of this variance to reconstruct the garage in the exact location that it was, and that's what we are seeking to do. So if you have no questions for me, I can call Mr. Babin. He'll be my only witness tonight. I do know that there are some of his neighbors, specifically the neighbor whose property this garage abuts, is here in support of the application. Mr. Babin has had numerous conversations with his neighbors so that they knew what was happening, and all have been supportive of this garage that he's spoken to.
If there are no questions, please proceed.
Yes. I do, yes. Edward G. Babin. Okay.
Mr. Babin, can you spell your name for the record, please?
Edward Babin, B-A-B-I-N.
And you're the owner of the property, is that correct?
Yes.
When did you acquire it?
Approximately 2013.
And this has been your primary residence?
Yes,
And when you purchased the property, there was a garage on site, is that correct?
that's correct, yes.
And we've marked as Exhibit A4, and inside of A4, B and C. Are those pictures of that garage when you purchased the property?
Yes, they are.
And the original garage was located, as I've described, within the side yard setback, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you know this because you engaged a surveyor as well as a planner to come out and survey the property and locate that garage, is that correct?
Yes, I have, yes.
And the results of that planning, they're shown on Exhibit A5, is that correct?
Yes, it is, yes.
And that's that the garage, as it existed then, was located 6 feet, 10 inches from the property line. Is that correct?
Yes,
And your intent, as shown on this plan, is to reconstruct the garage with that side yard setback at 6 feet, 10 inches, correct?
yeah, yes,
And we've marked Exhibit A6 as a copy of a grading application that you submitted to the town, or your agent submitted to the township. Is that correct?
yes,
And to your knowledge, that grading application and ultimately a building permit was issued for this project. Is that correct?
yes,
And during your application process, your agent, Mr. Lacy, communicated with the township, and a copy of that correspondence, or some of it, we've marked as Exhibit A7. Is that correct?
yes,
And it was your understanding, and it was shown on the plan, that there would be a foundation for that garage, and that foundation would have to remain, a portion of that wall.
yes.
That's what's represented on the plan.
Yes,
And if that foundation was removed, you would seek additional approval from the township.
yes,
And that's what brought you here tonight, is that correct?
yes,
Is what you are proposing what's shown on that plan, which we've marked Exhibit A5?
yes,
We've marked, again, Exhibit A4, a series of pictures. Can you turn to the picture marked Exhibit A4D?
yes.
Is that a picture of the current condition of your property?
That's correct, yes,
And that reflects that during your construction process, you stopped to obtain the additional township approvals we're seeking tonight. Is that correct?
yes,
If the board approves this application, you'll proceed with your construction that was shown on that plan. Is that correct?
yes,
Although you're not an engineer, you're familiar with the township's ordinances, isn't that correct?
yes,
And the required setback here is 10 feet. Is that correct?
that is correct, yes,
The proposed garage would be 6 feet, 10 inches from the side yard setback, or
Yeah.
from the property line, is that correct?
that is correct, yes.
You did not construct the initial garage, is that correct?
No, I did not. It was installed in 1920.
In 1920. Based on your conversations and your experience in the neighborhood, would construction of this garage in the location where it existed, and as you're proposing, be detrimental to the neighborhood?
It won't, because my neighbor to the left's garage is 3 foot off the line, and the neighbor to the right is on the line, and the neighbor directly across the street from me is on the line.
So is it your position then that garage in this location would be consistent with the neighborhood?
Yes,
You're not proposing any new access points to your property or increased traffic as a result of this garage?
no,
Do you believe there'll be any impact on the general welfare as a result of you reconstructing your garage where it's shown?
no,
And is this relief the minimum necessary in your mind to accomplish your proposed project?
yes,
You heard me testify in my opening that you had appeared before the HARB, is that correct?
that is correct.
And they recommended approval of this application.
They did recommend that the wall goes back where it was.
And have you had the opportunity to speak to your neighbors regarding this application?
Yes, several.
Have any neighbors expressed opposition?
No,
In fact, are there some neighbors here today with whom you've spoken that are here to support your application?
yes,
So I have no additional questions for Mr. Babin.
Questions from the board?
I have, are you changing the size of the structure in any way?
yes, yes, we are,
Okay.
yes.
And you're going larger, I
We're
presume?
going larger. It's
Yeah,
currently a
what's-
2-car garage, and I'm making it a 2-car garage, but wider, because the doors won't open when you have 2 cars in it.
Okay.
And deeper, because my truck can't fit in it.
But the only variance is on that side yard setback?
No
Yes.
additional relief is being
That's
sought.
correct.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this application?
Yes. Linda Massey. Oh, Masseylinda.
Great, good evening.
Good evening. I live right next to Ed Babin, and our driveways and garages are parallel. My garage is 3 feet from the property line, and his, I guess, was 6'10". So he has been a fabulous neighbor since he moved in. He has improved, I mean, he's done an incredible job on his house, spent a fortune renovating it, and improved the neighborhood so much. So I think he should be allowed to put his garage where it was, and that's all.
Great, thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak?
Yes, I do. Tracy, Tracie, Steely, Steely. I concur. I'm a neighbor in North Wayne. I live on Walnut Avenue, so I'm a couple blocks away, but have an interest in architecture and preserving the neighborhood. And I have watched Ed painstakingly, attention to detail, and just put his heart and soul into the property and enhancing his own property. And a lot of it is time and money, certainly, but it also has done so much for the neighborhood, for the community and whatnot. So we're in full support, and I think that there would be many more people here that would agree with that in the community, you know, had they had more notice or whatnot, but in full support.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Would someone like to make a motion on the request for the variance?
Motion to approve the variance under Code Section 280-22C, for encroachment in the side yard setback as in accordance with the testimony in the plans.
Second?
Second.
Any board discussion?
Just to particularly thank the neighbors for coming out, because it's helpful to us to hear directly from folks who are impacted, how they feel about things. So thank you.
If there's no other discussion, we'll call the vote. All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None? Good luck. Thank you.
Good luck.
We're done. Thank you.
All righty then.